Hello and welcome to the Point of Difference podcast. I am your host and coach of the Terrace crew, Matt Ricks. Well, we're only 2 weeks out from the start of the NRL season with Las Vegas, Nevada, Sunday week, all warming up. Very, very exciting stuff. A lot of good trial matches this weekend with the All-Stars match as well. The Maoris taking down the Indigenous All-Star 10 points to 6. We've got a very special show tonight. We've got a mid-ranges specials where we're focusing on players priced between 350k and 500k. And joining me to dissect the burial ground that is mid-ranges, it's Coach of Tubes' Pods. Tubes, after a hot start last week, thanks for coming back for week 2.
Yeah, no, good to be here. Nice to get some few tech upgrades this week. Feeling a bit more professional. I've gone for a bit of a clean cut haircut now that it seems like we're doing this video thing, so I thought I'd spruce up a little bit for today's episode.
Yeah, once we get the webcam sorted, you'll be airborne. It's production quality through the roof. Did you catch any of the Did you catch any trials on the weekend, Tubes, by any chance?
Mostly a few KO minis to catch up, just to see how things are going. I did watch a little bit of that first section of the Eels game, and it didn't take long for Iongi to slot into my team and have a quick look around. But then I thought it was a bit of an interesting one with that number 14, I think, that came off he was in the 2024 jersey or something like that, who played the second half and looked unbelievable at fullback for Parramatta. So might be a hotter competition there than we think.
It's Josiah Papali'i, I think.
Yeah. I mean, Iongi looked good.
I saw he turned up on the scores.
Iongi looked good for his limited time, but Papali'i looks like a sort of like Keanu Kinney, just unbelievable. Looks like a freak athlete, but bit on the shorter side for a fullback in first grade.
Very interesting. Also joining me tonight from London, coach of the Casa Bonitas, former third place overall finisher, Dan Ricks. Danny boy, welcome back.
Yeah, thanks, buddy. I feel good with these tech upgrades as well. I just got to get the studio sorted. A few renovations at home should do the trick. But yeah, coming out of winter time, a little bit of London, a little bit brighter in the day, which is nice. And a little bit of footy on the TV in the mornings over here. So yeah, good to get back into it.
So you got your little Lakes jumper on there. That's nice for a cool morning in London. Yeah, bit
of merch, just hoping for some drier days so I can get out on course. Don't have to resort to the sim every week.
You've shaved the
Damien Cook.
Yeah, what's happened there? What's the go? We got to get Cookie on the pod one day.
Yeah, we'll get him on. He's a friend of the show. I think he's a big listener. I think he's ever come on the show. Big listener. And his brother Simon is giving me tips every week. I know he's on the blower every week to Damien, tell him how he's playing, how many runs to have each week. So yeah, it'll be interesting this year, Damien at the Dragons.
A lot of correlation between you two, actually. You were probably a bit less successful in the beach sprinting flags department, but still pretty good at it. And then similar goatee department as well,
similar rugby league career, just 6 levels below.
Yeah, what was it? Started in the halves, went to hooker. Yeah. It's enough about my rugby league career.
All right, let's get on with it. We do have our group code open for this season, and I'm telling you, you're going to want to be in this group for later in the year. We are going to have some monster prizes available. So if you can jump in, 730444. 444 is the Pod Open League for this season. So jump on in there when you get a chance. We're going to have some major prizes with some big sponsors coming on board. So very exciting, and you got to be in there to have your crack at the prize. All right, let's get into mid-ranges. Enough faffing around. Dan, mid-ranges, 350k to 500k is where we're focusing our attention. Now, generally how you classify mid-ranger and why those players are in that price range. They're either career mid-rangers, someone like a Chad Townsend at the lower end of that spectrum. They're fallen guns, so previously gun supercoach players who might have had a down year, they might have lost a bit of form or lost a role, and they're sort of prevailing as an option for this season. You got guys coming back from injury-impacted seasons last year, so certainly a guy who's probably not a mid-ranger, Tino Fasul Meliawi. He's in that sort of mid-range price bracket. We won't get into him tonight because he's obviously he's a gun, but he's obviously coming back from that injury. And then you got guys who have new and emerging roles. Who maybe the minutes weren't just there for last year or this year. They got a nice new role on an edge, particularly, or on a nice wing for their NRL club. So they're the sort of guys that we're going to be looking at tonight, and we're going to try and focus on the high ownership ones as well. So the guys who are really catching the attention of super coaches out there. Dan, we chatted a little bit last week on mid ranges and why with sort of the amount of cheapies prevailing this year, why we're sort of potentially looking away from the mid ranges. But that's not to say that there aren't one or two that can catch your eye. How are you approaching mid ranges this season, and what's your general sort of disposition towards them?
Yeah, so it was interesting going through for this pod, kind of going through the lists, writing down all the mid ranges, and I'm kind of in the field of not wanting to touch any of them early on if I can. They're all very interesting, so it's more just to like who potentially can get off to a hot start, but because of the size of the field of mid-rangers, it's really hard to take a flyer on any of them and get lucky. So, I'd rather take a flyer on someone who's DK compared to 400 just because of the amount of cash it gives you to upgrade elsewhere. And then if you don't get off to a hot start with a mid-ranger, you can sometimes just hold on to them for too long because you're expecting them to get back to where you initially thought they were going to get to at the start of the season. Sean Lane last year, a lot of people said, he could get back to gun status, held on to him 6, 7, 10 rounds go by, and he still just hasn't done anything. So I just think they can get stuck in your team, and they're always in your 17, and they just sometimes don't perform that well for you. So for that reason, I'm going to try to sit back as much as I can, get the cheapies and the guns, and then hopefully a couple of those mid-rangers hit early. I can pick them up early when I see the signs are there.
Yeah, I think that's my general approach as well, is that I always get suckered in a little bit in pre-season too. One or two guys this year as well, like Seyfarth caught my attention a bit. Don't think he's particularly great at NRL, but that role that if he does get that 80-minute role, it's looking like he's going to get that role. It's very enticing. He's a big sort of, he does have a good PPM of points per minute. But I think you're right, is that it's been a graveyard. Like, these guys will hit, one of them or two of them will hit, but picking out which one can be very, very tricky to do because they all kind of look like they could kick on. They're sort of that right in between being someone who you want in your 17 versus someone who's going to make cash. And generally if they don't do one, they're not going to do both. So you get hit on both angles there, where they're not a super playable gun option without the upside, and they're not making money. So it's really that, I want to say double-edged sword, but that's not the right term. But it can be quite tricky. And you mentioned Sean Lane as well. You said he can get stuck in your side. He never left my team. 27 rounds all year. Very, very tricky, and I never wanted to play him. So he became an AE. Yeah, so it certainly rings true. Tubes, what's your mid-range strategy at this point of the preseason?
I think I said it last week. Like, I just don't want them at all. I think what you just said about some will hit, I think it's obvious usually which ones will hit, and then we hope for some of the other ones. This year, we'll probably talk about a few tonight, but there's maybe one or two that stand out above the pack as possibilities if the minutes are going to be there. But on the whole, I think that it's a bit of a dumpster fire, and that's why I'm really keen on the cheapies and guns strategy. But maybe tonight will talk me into a few of them.
Yeah, look, I've got a few thoughts on especially like positions-wise. I think there's like 2 RFs are probably the most dangerous in my opinion. I think there's some other ones, and also we need to say that this is a spectrum, right? Like 350k is very different to 500k for some of these positions. We're talking about 15 to 16 points worth of value there. So every player has to be put into their own context. We're going to do this positionally, so we'll start at the top with hooker, and there aren't many mid-ranges in hooker, Dan. Brendan Hands comes up just under the 350k at 349k. So we'll have a quick chat about him. It's just completely role dependent, Brendan Hands. If he's got the 80-minute hooking role, then it's probably a pretty hard yes for a lot of super coaches, I would have thought.
I got suckered into Brendan Hands last year, so I think Joey Lussick got the start. Hands might have been injured as well or something, but when Brendan Hands came and played an 80-minute game, Lussick had seemed to be out of the side. I'm like, yep, this is it. Low price, let's get on. And yeah, to be honest, he looked okay, but then Joey Lussick creeps back into the side. He starts to drop minutes. I think there's still that. And I think Riley Smith is the new hooker at Parramatta. He looked pretty good. Some good chat on him. So I think even if he does look like he's the 80-minute hooker to start, I'm not really confident that that'll be the case in round 3 or round 4. So, yeah, just want to know that you might have to switch it up at some stage early on if you see those other hookers there.
So, potential trap. Brendan Hands. It is interesting because hooker, there are a few cheapy options, obviously, with Sandon Smith, and obviously there's the Connor Watson, Kalani going sort of switcheroo to be had there as well. So Hands will be interesting if he starts. Joey, you really want to hear a few good noises though out of Jason Roll and the Para camp. Tubes front row forward, not my favourite place for mid ranges, but we obviously get Corey Horsburgh this year at that 350, 360k. I've got Big Horse in my team. I think the question for him is, do you bench here? Are you happy to run him at front row forward 2, or are you keeping him on the hopefully 80-17?
Yeah, I mean he's the one of the ones I was alluding to before. I think he's just the obvious mid ranger that could pop this year, whether starting or on the bench. I just think it all comes down to what Ricky does with his minutes, and obviously there's been some positive chatter coming out of there, and he is a good footballer. So if you do pick him, I'll be starting with him as front row forward 2, but only because I think I have Tino floating around there as well. So him and Tino both being dual is nice as well. So you can sort of flip them around, have Tino as your front row forward 2, or keep Tino in the back row, depending on how he's going. So I think there's plenty of flexibility around there, especially if you get a dual nuff as well.
Dan, these guys away from Horsburgh, who's obviously very much in the fall and gun category and injury impacted season from last year. Guys like your Aaron Clarks, who looks like he might have an okay role at the Warriors, Naha Fahu White, who is an emerging front rower / lock, who, minutes could be there in the middle. And then you got your players like a Sofa Solomona, who's not a starting option with he's suspended in round 2. I just feel for these front rowers that you can't really start with. They're sort of depth options, but that's 150 to 200k that you're not spending on the rest of your squad for players that you're never really going to get a ton of value of and out of, and that you can jump on quite easily at whenever you need to.
Yeah, front rowers are always up in the air with minutes. So they're not 80-minute guys. They can have 30-minute games. They can have 55-minute games, and they're all PPM dependent. So I think if you're going to go for a mid-ranger, like you've got Horsburgh, who's got the history of being able to go 80 minutes, big minutes, offloads, you can kind of rely on that. The other guys, if the history's there that they're getting that sort of 50, 55 minutes, their PPM's lower than 1. Really not keen to see them sort of anywhere near my side. I think you can, what you can expect with that. And, some guys, as you said, the up and comers, White potentially really good with a couple of middles out of the side at the Roosters there. Toby Couchman is one that's really interesting to me. I think he could explode this year if he gets some minutes.
He's got some pretty decent results from very much under the radar from last year.
Yeah, looks very good. Big up and comer, like an up and comer, getting bigger. And yeah, if he plays, I think he started at front row on the weekends. I didn't catch the game.
Yeah, he did. Francis Molo's walking out on the club He's had a blow up with one of the coaches / Flano, I guess. I don't know what's going on, but
Yeah, no, Molo's out. Couchman started front row in their full strength team. Shout out to Rugby League Realm as well. He put me on to the Couchman idea a bit as well, and Dan's also had him on the radar. There's a chance I would suggest that he gets front row, second row dual before the season. So I think he becomes a pretty relevant front row forward 2 option if he does get that front row dual. But yeah, I mean, he's 483 or 490 or something, so he's not, certainly he's at that upper end of the mid-range category. But I think, like Dan said, just some really good numbers from last year, and he looks like he could lock down a role that's sort of that 55-minute range. One to watch out for sure.
But do you want to do that? Like, even say he's pretty good. Like, I don't know. Like, say he averages 60. Would that be good? Would you consider that a win for the year? Like,
yeah,
like you're gonna have Terrell May and Tino. Like, do you need another nearly 500k guy sitting in your front row forward? Like, it just feels a bit of a waste of money for me, even if he does average that.
If he's averaging 60, I do.
Yeah, you want a rotating front row forward who's averaging 55 over 55 plus. So you want 3 of those guys. With Tino, Horsburgh, they can move to the second row. Got that flexibility. He'll have that flexibility too if he gets that dual position straight up. I think we spoke about it. If you're going to take a flyer and a mid-ranger, you want them to make at least 100k, if not 150 to 200. That would be ideal. So if he's averaging between 60 and 65, he's making that good cash. And he could be an end game third front row forward. So yeah,
he'd be doing well to average 60. I just don't think. I mean, even if he does, it's a tough one because then I didn't even mention obviously like Horsburgh sort of sits in there as well. Like that's 3 should be pretty good front row forwards. But yeah, obviously if he starts, he'll be value.
The flex is just so important there. Like Dan said, like you can't underestimate. Like I know we got the flex position this year. I think having these players who you can shift around in conjunction with the flex, I think that's going to be a bit of a cheat code, more so than usual even. Yeah, I'll be having a good look at Couchy. Let's move on to the back row where Couchy's currently residing, but some interesting options as we said, and I think the real graveyard in the 2RF has been that 400k range. So we had Sean Lane, Brendan Piakura last season was I think most people are still scarred by his 4 in the first Vegas game, and he had a very, very poor end to the season. I had a quick look at his numbers today. He was dropping 80-minute games with scores in the 20s, so he's in a fight with, of all people, Jack Kashevsky for edge position at the Broncos. But Dan, we've got guys in here, and I'm just going to rattle off a couple popular ones. Kelma Tuolangi, he's a guy who's shown some ball playing and tackle busting potential on the edge there for Parramatta. Alex Seyfarth. Who else can we throw in there? Probably Fini Fuiaki from the Dolphins. These are sort of guys who are looking. They've got these new roles at their emerging roles at these new clubs. I'm just not sold still on any of them unless you get. I think that what you're looking for types of guys like that in the preseason is big pushes from their head coaches to say, yep, he's our guy, he's our 80-minute man on the edge.
Yeah, particularly the ones you spoke about, Dolphins, Broncos, Parramatta specifically. I think they all look appealing options. So you look at their stats, can they get 80 minutes, potential attack, it looks great. Those 3 teams as well just have a really stacked back row. So it's really hard to gauge if that's going to be locked down. So, the likes of Finifuaki, Lemu Elu, they've got to contend with a fair few people there. They're both good up-and-comers. I like the look of them, but you're just not sure what the rotations are going to be there. So, again, you're just taking a flyer on the potential 80 minutes. But if they do lock that down, I think some of those options, are not terrible, but not interested me at the start of the season. I'm going to wait to see those roles play out.
I think that's fair. Tubes, Jack Bird's probably been the most popular dual 2RF CT dub. He's also the cheapest, or just about the cheapest in that dual range. He's got some big numbers from his lock career prior to coming to the Tigers. He's had a very rocky career, I think it's fair to say, both from a Supercoach perspective and NRL, since he burst onto the scene with the Sharkies back in 2015. Is he in your plans?
I don't want him to be. Like, I sort of, a few weeks ago, was thinking I just don't want Jack Bird in my team. Not because of anything to do with him, but I just think he's just had been so up and down, and ever since he left the Sharkies after a couple of very good seasons to start his career, he just hasn't been able to hit his straps. With that being said, under sub 380k, if he's a starting lock for the Tigers, in a team where Seyfarth is potentially playing 80 minutes on the edge and, the likes of Twal, etc., sort of on the bench, I think his minutes should be pretty good, and it's really only going to be injury. It feels, with the dual flexibility into centre wing, it feels like a pretty free bet to start the year. As long as he starts. If he's on the bench, I just won't be anywhere near touching him.
He has to be starting at lock, which it looks like he will. Where are you putting him, in 2RF or the centre wing?
No, so I think I'll start him in 2RF, and then with the plan to, when you start getting some cash, hopefully if you ping a couple of good ones in centre wing, then you move him down there throughout the season when you're upgrading into it.
Yep. I won't spend too much longer, Dan, on Bird, but I'm keen to get your thoughts on him. Just given he's 30% owned, very popular. I think he would be, for me. I think he'd be a solid enough pick as a 2RF only. But like we spoke about, that optionality that the dual gives you is just gold. And I think having him up at 2RF to start is a pretty sound strategy.
Yeah, if I take him, it's definitely a 2RF to start with. 80 minutes lock. It sounds great. Injury prone. So that's a little bit to look out for. And I think the thing about Bird is his versatility really hinders him in Supercoach, because he could play so many positions. So a few injuries go on early, he could be playing centres, 5'8", through the middle with limited minutes. He could even go the back row on the edge. So you can't get consistency with it. So I think he's cheap enough this year that you could, if he gets that lock spot, I'll probably pick him up where I can. But just watch out for those role changes.
Yeah, the good thing he's got on his side is just they just don't have many big minute middles, the Tigers. They got May, obviously, who's going to have to do a ton of work. You'd think probably 60 to 65. And then you're looking at Royce Hunt, who's a small minutes impact player. David Clemmer and Alex Twal, you're probably not looking to get more than 40 minutes, maybe 50 for Twal on a struggling week, but they're not guys who can play lock. Fanua Pole is a bit of a young up and comer, but again, he's more of a bigger middle sort of. He's got a few skills, but he's not really a ball playing lock. And I think the way that Benji wants to play, he's going to need Jack Bird to be playing that ball playing role, and he's certainly tough enough for the middle. So I'm pretty confident he'll get some decent minutes there. Let's move to halfback now, half 5'8" rather, and the two names here, they're both pretty exciting names, to be honest. Tubes. Adam Dewey is a guy who has a very, very friendly Supercoach game. He shot the lights out a couple of years ago at the Tigers. He's obviously had some terrible ACL injuries. And Lukey Metcalf, he's an ex-Sharky, and he looked good last year until he went down with the season-ending injury as well. He was 5'8". He's moved to halfback, it looks like, for the Warriors this year. Chips, I'm going to let you have a pick your own Dewey versus Metcalf chat here. Who do you want to start with?
I'll talk about Dewey. I think Metcalf just is a lock and load kicking halfback for the Warriors at the price. Dewey, for me, I think it's just a wait and see. I know he's had a Supercoach friendly game. I think Appy's missing round 1 through suspension or something like that. So you don't know who's going to be goal kicking, which I think is a bit up in the air. I mean, I don't know if either played in the trial tonight. So that's a bit of a unknown. I think even if he did get the kicking, him at centre at 436k, I just feel at that price, especially in the 5'8" spot, you can pick him up later on. And for me, it just feels like a risk that I don't want to take to start off the year with him at 5'8". There's just a few up in the air. As I said, kicking, what's he going to look like at centre? It's really a price that if he was sort of a dominant half, or he's obviously played fullback in the past and kicking goals, that's usually when he's excelled from a Supercoach point of view.
Dan, I don't mind the idea of starting with Dewey if he gets the goal kicking at centre, at centre wing, given he's got that dual status. If you then want to run a Metcalf Nuff strategy at 5'8", or a Metcalf, probably it looks like Metcalf's going to be close enough to must have given his role. But even if you were going to go a Munster or a Dillbags at 5'8" with enough, that just gives you a bit of an insurance policy as well on Dewey. We know he's got the ceiling in him, and if he's goal kicking, then that lifts his floor up a bit as well.
Yeah, I'm a big Dewey fan for Supercoach particularly. I think he's looked great, and unfortunately the injuries have hampered him. I agree. I'm keen on that Nuff strategy at 5'8" for that second one. Metcalf is probably going to be the number one. I don't think I'd run Dewey at number one 5'8". It's either going to be as the second or in the centre wing. So the good thing about that centre wing flip is Metcalf goes down injured, Dewey can go straight into 5'8", and then you're probably going to find cash generating centre wing to bring in, and then you're going cheaper. You might get 150, 200k spare to upgrade somewhere else. So I'm very keen on that. I think that's good. I think also you could run with, if you want to go antipod, not go Metcalf, you could do Adam Dewey and Blaze Talangi if the signs are there, who both have that dual status. So you can flip them around to that first 5'8". So I think enough strategy at 5'8" is good to go.
Yeah, I've really warmed up to that recently. Even if I don't want Dewey, I still don't think that's the worst. Because if you do go with Dewey at centre wing to then push him up if Metcalf gets injured or whatever, like you said, you can use that cash at centre wing for cash generating or for getting a gun, and you can always go and sort out 5'8" later once we get these guys who are either falling in price. But you'd need 2 injuries to knock out that strategy. So I think that's quite a good insurance policy.
What am I missing? You both have said he's a proven gun and he's shown it before, but he played 5'8" and fullback. Why such confidence in a person going to centre for the Tigers? Because it's been a good hunting ground in the past.
Didn't say proven gun. He's a good super.
What did he average
player.
last year? When he played some centres last year, didn't he? And I'm guessing he's coming in at his averages.
He averaged 49 last year.
So average 49, below price, possible goal kicking. So there's value there.
Yeah, gets a goal kicking. Let's say that's 8 points conservatively. He doesn't have to do anything to go to 57 average, and he's priced at a 45.
Yeah, and yeah, just on that, I think he is one to watch, and you don't have to start with him necessarily. I'm also floating with going ultra premium for that first 5'8" spot, so Dillbags or Munster or something like that, and then nothing as my second. And then if you see the signs are there with Metcalf, Dewey, something like that, that's about the same amount of cash. So you could flip to those 2 mid-ranges if the signs are there. So yeah, I don't think he's a lock-in for sure, but he definitely interests me.
I kind of want an antipod Metcalf, but just the role looks a bit too good, like the amount of ball he's getting. But I think that could be a pretty ballsy play to do that. I got to think about that one a bit more. It's just one that if you want to take on the crowd or not, and can he? I think he's got a ceiling, and that's the thing that scares me. So that's what you don't want when you're going against the crowd for such a big bet. All right, let's move down to centre wing. And just as we come out of the halves discussion, I do want to say at that point, it is interesting, positionally for mid-rangers, that, Dan and I have sort of spoken about Dewey and guys like that we feel a bit better taking a punt on because we think, whether the upside's there or the role within the team or strategically for the setup of our teams, it works. And then there's guys like the 2RF where there's, it just doesn't feel as comfortable as a general rule. Centre wing is a position that I think is the most dependent from a mid-range perspective on how the rest of your team is set up and where you want to spend your money. So I think it's probably the position that I feel the most comfortable about picking a guy, because a guy in that mid-range price category, because I just feel like you can get somewhat known value there. These guys are playing 80 minutes or guaranteed close enough to be playing 80 minutes every week. Sometimes there might be a little bit of their doubt about their role in the team ongoing. So you've got to be a bit careful about depth charts and knowing what the coach is like. Is the team going to start really poorly, and is their position in the team at risk? Tubes, let's start with you on some of these mid-range to centre wing options. Where do you want to start? Let's go with let's go with popular ones. Gerald Skelton is in that high 400s category. He's come across from the Dogs to the West Tigers this year. Looks like he's locked into that wing. I'm not sure which wing he's going to actually start on, left or right. Does that, one, have you got him in your team at the moment? And two, do you care what wing he plays on?
I think I'm just going to handball this to Dan. I literally haven't got him in my team, and
I thought you were going to say I don't know who he is.
I don't know. I know who he is, but I sort of just went Tigers winger nearly 500k. No thanks. So I'll just handball that across to Dan.
Just throw a cutout, Tubes. This is an NRL podcast.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, David Nofaluma used to be pretty good on the wing for the Tigers. So Skelton, big base boy, does a lot of work, very powerful, gets those power stats. Can jag a try, obviously, on the wing there. It's like Supercoach is trying to entice us into buying Tigers this year. I'm not sure why his average was more than what he's worth this year as well. So I'm semi-keen. I think he's nearly at that level of a top tier centre wing, maybe not as your top 4 end game, but certainly 5th or 6th centre wing. I could see him staying in my team, playing on matchups regularly, if not just basing a good amount for the week as well. So I'm pretty keen on Skelton. I think it's fairly safe with the base that he's got. I'm not keen that Tigers are going to go very well, but I don't think that'll matter too much for him.
Yeah, I think for Skelton it'll just come down to, can he get over the stripe a few times in the first, sort of 5-6 rounds. He had 4 games last year. One game he only played 64 minutes, got injured. He got a 27. In 2 of the 4 games he scored a try, and in both those games he went over 90. So he's got those power stats in him. If he's a big body. So those are the type of guys. Like I'm pretty interested as well. He's in my team at the moment. I share Tubes' concerns around the Tigers, but I think he's just got a high enough floor that makes him a nice price. Some of the other emerging options and some of the ones, there's a few regular names on this list, I suppose. Jack Howarth from the Storm, he had a great year last year. Ben Trebojevic, Burbo from Manly, he looks like he's locked down that edge role at the Manly Seagulls this season. And then another one who's pretty interesting is Munro from the South Sydney Rabbitohs. Tubes. He looks like he's gotten that left wing spot vacated by Alex Johnston, who's out for at least half the season with an Achilles rupture. He's a pretty polarising player, Munro. He's got the pace and he knows where the try line is, but he certainly looks like he's got a very low floor, and he's just under the 400k mark, Tubes.
Yeah, I think I had him in my team most of the start of the season, and I think the thing that can lull you in for him is just that high upside. Like if South's go on a run on that left-hand edge, as you said, we've seen Alex Johnson do it many times before without the base, and especially if Latrell starts off the year firing from round 1. And Munro's just electric. Like his pace is unbelievable. He'll be able to finish. His base is a little bit concerning. So that's probably just the pause. So it feels like a bit of a punt, and you're punting on just some big starts to the year for some of those high upside plays. I think it'll be interesting. The other side of the South's backline, it looks like Isaiah Tass at full strength, depending on what happens with Campbell Graham back. But when Campbell Graham's back, it looks like Tass is likely to slot into that right wing spot. He had a bit of a down year, Tass. He had some injuries and was playing in the centres, and just I mean, South's had a bad year. So if you write that off, if you look back at his 2023 stats, his base was pretty solid. I think it was averaging above 30. And I just think if you look at sort of that South Sydney backline, like we just said, Munro's not really digging you out of your own end. Trell isn't a known taking a hit up to bring you out of your own end. So it's sort of Tass, Jackie Boy, and probably Campbell Graham. And I just think it's similar, that right edge for the Bunnies can be potent with, potentially White in there, Keon Kolomatangi, etc. Especially if Campbell Graham's back. I think at a little bit cheaper, 312K or something like that. I think the price could be right to start the year with him as a borderline cheapie.
Yeah, I think he's 326 or something.
Yeah, okay.
The only question I've got for Souths, and I don't really know how to handle it, is you're coming back with, if you've got, potentially you could have Graham, Munro, Tass all as pretty viable options. I'm not sure, Dan, but that's probably a little bit too much overstacked.
And the trail.
Souths. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I think from, if you're talking about a Tuss versus Munro, I think you're getting them for completely different reasons. Tuss is cheap enough, as in he's going to make cash, I think, just from basing and being out there for 80 minutes alone. I was just looking back at South last year. I mean, they didn't have the best of seasons, but Jacob Gagai, notorious low baser on the wing, he turned up a few times. He went in 6 rounds, made 200K. So I think with looking at that, that's what you're hoping for with the Munro. You're just hoping for that extra fast start, doubles, hat tricks early on, make that cash and upgrade. So I don't mind starting with Munro, and particularly because he's under 400K. So yeah, I think both are options, but one, you're looking at a bit more of a pace man, maybe a slower burn, maybe Task, you could start him in your 17 and be confident he's going to go okay. And then Munro, it's a bit more of a flyer.
Would you be looking, if you went with the Munro strategy, and you obviously said that you're looking for that flyer, if he doesn't get the flyer and he's either looking at hovering around that 400K mark, or he might even drop, would you have any hesitation hitting the exit button in sort of round 3 or 4?
Probably not at centre wing, because I think there'll be some options coming to make big cash quickly. So whoever does get the flyer, if he's not making it, and I think, as we said last week, I think the strategy this year is just going to be, as soon as you see some bad signs for mid-rangers, just get them out of your side. Just be ruthless, move them on early.
I just think that, it sounds good, but you just always have bigger problems than your 400K mid-rangers that you just can talk yourself into coming good.
They just haven't scored a try yet.
Yeah. I could easily see him going 30-30, and it's just like, well, that South's run the next few weeks looks pretty good. I could see him just getting in a few tries. I do like Munro. It's just such an awkward price. I'm actually Tass over Munro. I think Gagai might have even played the right. I don't think it's like a given that they definitely going left for their big try scoring moments.
No,
anyway.
It's not. Yeah. I just think that historically it's a pretty good position, South wing. You talk about Jack Howarth. I think he looks good as a player, NRL, but historically you look at the scores for Melbourne centres, it's just the game plan they play isn't conducive to Supercoach score output going well or over a decent base. I think the history's there for a South winger.
I don't know, Dan. I think you're a bit biased there with Nicky Boy Meaney last year sort of taking down your season. You don't want another Storm centre.
Maybe.
Just back to South for a sec. It is interesting, with the Munro conundrum there. They open with Dolphins, Finns, and then Sharkies. So pretty friendly
Dolphins,
first.
Finns?
Dragons, isn't
Dragons.
it?
Dolphins, Dragons, yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
Dolphins, Dragons, Sharkies. So very friendly start. But then they run into round 4, they run into Penrith, Roosters, Cows, Dogs, Storm. So I think you'd probably be looking at that. I think the opportunity. I think you go in there with Munro and go, okay, look, let's try and grab that flyer. If we do, we'll ride the cash rises. But if you don't, then you're going to run into that tough draw. So you probably just want to start planning for that downgrade or upgrade option. Anything else, Danny Boy? Centre wing? Anyone else catching your eye in that sort of? There's you got a couple of guys there. Maybe Marky Mark from the Roosters. Not going to try his. Let's get into the season a little bit. Let me hear some commentary before I try and pronounce his last name. And Jackie Boy Whiten. And finally in that collection as well is just Casey McLean from the Panthers, who's currently in my squad.
Yeah, I think Casey is nearly the safest out of all of them there, 440K. I mean, if he gets the start, the depth at Panthers for the wing spots is quite low, so he's competing against his brother for that wing spot. I'm kind of hoping Jesse's there. That's a much better option for the cheap. Go cheap. McLean showed some good promise with his base work at centre last year. He looks a great player. Panthers are going to score points. So I think he's the most secure mid-ranger nearly of the lot.
Yep, I agree. Unless Marky Mark gets the goal kicking, I'll probably sit on him, just see how he goes. And then the other one there, Jack White. And we spoke about Souths a lot. And I'm going to struggle to get Jack in the team like this early. Obviously, Wayne there, I think, will help Jack a lot. But he's a bit of a wait and see for me at this point in time. Fullbacks, obviously, the big talking point, which we covered last week, is Isaiah Yongi for that second fullback / flex position. Dan, I've got a note here just around mid-range fullbacks, and I think this is the one position where when we talk mid-range, we're sort of more in that upper echelon of between 500 and 6K. I feel like those guys, not to start the season, I don't think any of them are starting options, but I'm talking about guys like Nickel Klukstart, Pappenhausen, Hammer, and Gutho. Maybe with the exception of Pappenhausen, I can see why maybe you'd start with him. But those types of guys, through the season, when you're going to have the cash to maybe not get to a premium, but these guys coming in on their runs, I think some of these mid-range fullbacks with the flex position this year could have a significant role to play.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with that. I think there's a potential there. You could start with 3-gun fullbacks with the flex and maybe go a lesser. So say a Pappenhausen, something like that. The buy in round 2 is awkward. So I agree with you that it's hard to start with it. But fullback, like I think you were talking about, Matt, you're running some data at the moment on projections, like just how much it depends on the runs that they go on. So if you can see a really dreamy run for 3 or 4 games, like they've bottomed out in price. I think that option with the fullback sort of roulette flipping around, especially if the big guns are going down injured, I think that's a great option.
All right.
I disagree.
Tubes. I was nearly going to end the pot. And Tubes is, yeah. What do you got, Tubes?
I just heard Dan talk about fullback roulette, and I just thought I better get in there and have a bit of a chat. No, like I could be biased because of some looking at reviewing my 2024 season and looking at bringing in someone like a Gutho really was to a huge detriment to me, looking to antipod the likes of Teddy, Turbo, etc. at the back end of the season. And whilst I do agree with the fact that getting the right runs at fullback, I just think that outside of Pappy, for who you mentioned, Matt, like obviously he's a proven gun and could be back up there with the elite, especially if he does start kicking goals again from a Storm perspective. But I think I'm going to have my hard rule for this year, which I'm going to abide by, which is I'm basically not going to be picking a fullback outside of unless there's a gun cheapie like Yongi, but outside of the Teddy, Turbo, Trell, Ponga, Drinky, Walsh, and Pappenhausen, that's it. Like I'm getting my 3 from those ones, and
you're not going wide,
not deviating. I think it's a safer play. I think you're going to get more upside. You're only going to regret, realistically, bringing in, because it's not even about them going well. Like they might do well, they might get a couple of good hundreds, but the others are just so good that like they're just going to make you pay over the long.
Yeah. Fair enough. It's going to be an interesting season with fullback. Can't wait to see how it prevails and the different strategies that super coaches out there launch into. All right, that'll see us out for our second preseason episode of the season. Been good fun, and looking forward to another chat next week. Thank you very much, Dan.
Yeah, thank you, Matty. Cheers.
And Tubes, I'll see you bright and early for our little trip away. Should be a beauty, and enjoy your beauty sleep.
Cheers, Matt. You beauty.
See you, everyone. Thank you.